Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie McInnes, Marketing Director at Unified Compliance. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today. As people continue to join, I'll just go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll, of course, share the replay link soon with everyone who registered. If you have any questions, please submit them in the question panel, and we'll try to get to as many as we can during the Q&A at the end. Today we have Ashwin, a GRC solutions architect who has been instrumental in deploying MetricStream's cloud platform suite across the world, but focusing on the UK and Europe. And we have Jason with Unified Compliance, a speaker and trainer on corporate governance, risk management, compliance, GRC, internal controls, and audits. So thanks again for joining us. Let's go ahead and jump in. Jason, over to you.
All right, well, here we go, everybody. Buckle up because you're in for a treat today, because I'm guessing if you're like most people, somebody has probably come to you and said, hey, figure out what we need to do about these different compliance mandates, right? We have to comply with certain documents. You go figure out what it is that we need to do so we can say, give them the old thumbs up, we are compliant with that particular thing. Now, in your organization, it's probably not just one thing, but there's probably lots of different compliance mandates that you have to comply with. And so today we want to go through and show you some of the steps and how you can actually simplify, make it much easier for you, because I'm guessing, again, you probably already have a lot to do. So anything you can do to make it simpler and easier so you have more time, you're probably all over there, jumping around going, yes, 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 yes. Show us how to do that. So that's what we're going to jump in to talk about today. Now, it's a simplified step, but I'm just going to go through this really quick. There's different steps that you will need to go through in order to comply with these various documents that you need to do. And so what you see on here is I'm going to run through the bullet points really quick. Off to the end, I have put parentheses with certain words. And so those words you're going to see me talking about as we go through. So it's kind of explaining what it is and then a word or something that goes along with it, okay? So the first thing is you have to figure out what your requirements are. Which authority documents do you need to follow? And I'm going to talk about what that is in just a minute. Then you need to go through, you have to read and understand those authority documents. They are going to be made up of different citations. Think of a citation like a paragraph reference. You have to go through, you have to understand what is in that document. Now, not everything in that document is asking you to do something or a have to do, right? Sometimes it might be an act of the US Congress. Well, you don't have to do anything about that. So you have to look through the citations, figure out what mandates are in there or what things you must do. Next, you have to interpret the mandates so that they're easy to understand, because again, a lot of times if you've read these documents, it's not in plain English. And so you have to figure out what it is that we are going to do and how we are going to do it. Next, you have to go through and compare the mandates between the different authority documents. Because again, like I told you at the beginning, there's probably multiple documents that you have to comply with. And many of those documents are asking you to do some of the same things. So you have to go through kind of a crosswalking exercise to figure out, okay, it's asking me to do this over here. Where else is it asking me to do this, so that you can tie everything together? And we're going to go through and show you a little bit about that, but that's called crosswalking. Now, since you know that there's already going to be duplication between and within those documents, meaning sometimes those documents are asking you to do pretty much the same thing, but they're just using different words. And so you have to go through the whole step of trying to deduplicate those different mandates, because it really doesn't make a lot of sense for you to do 5 different controls if really those 5 things are really only asking you to do one thing. So you need to go through a deduplication exercise as well. Now, after you get through that, now you have to actually document how and what you are doing to comply. And so there's different ways you can do that. You can export, you can create some kind of a spreadsheet, you can use a GRC tool, and that's why we're happy to have MetricStream with us today, because they're actually going to show you how it actually, you can use it in a GRC tool like this. Now, once you've done that as well, then you still have to go back and conduct audits to prove that those things have actually been implemented as well. So before we jump into everything, like I said, I just wanted to give you an overview of all the different steps that you're just going to need to go through from a compliance perspective. Okay, so here we go. Typical problems people having is, how do I track authority documents? Which ones do I have to follow? Have there been updates? Those are some of the issues that people have in dealing with compliance issues. How do you interpret the wonk speak? Okay, that's a great word to pretty much say what I said before, that most of the time the citations are not in plain English. And so you have to figure out what it is. How do you go through and make the matching to the controls process something that's repeatable? Because again, if you're just trying to do this ad hoc for thousands of different things, it makes your life really tough, right? And so you need to come up with some way that's repeatable, that you can do this over and over again, and people on your team can do it as well. Now, also, you're going to have to build in some sort of defensible methodology, meaning that you can prove that by doing this particular thing, you're actually fulfilling the mandate. And so you have to come up with some way to link that back to that actual citation and mandate in the authority document. A lot of people struggle to do that, right? They kind of forget. They create all these different controls, but they're not sure which ones actually support which of the authority documents. So when somebody comes in to audit, they're like, well, we're doing these things, but the auditor says, but are you doing this thing, right? The other thing is, how do you create something that has modularity and is extensible, meaning that you can actually scale it up. So you can do it with one document, but you can also do it with 10 or 15 documents. And so again, today we're going to go through quickly and show you how you can actually do this and how you can avoid some of the typical problems that most people have when they're trying to comply. Now, to start off with, I got a picture here of the DeLorean. If you're a fan of Back to the Future, that was an awesome car, right? Or, excuse me, sorry, I've got a little tickle in my throat today. So you have to make a decision at this point, right? Do you want to do something that is off the rack, or do you want to do it yourself? There's lots of DIY shows on TV, how to remodel your house, how to do different things like this. In this case, as an example, if you need a car, right, you can choose to go buy an off-the-rack car, like a Toyota RAV4, which happens to be the #1 selling non-pickup truck in America this last year. And you can spend $30,000 or $35,000 and go buy an off-the-rack automobile. Now, it may not do everything you want it to do, but it probably does 80 to 90% of what you need it to do. And so investing $30,000 compared to, building a special DeLorean at $1 to $2 million, well, really, you just have to make the choice, right? Is 80 or 90% probably good enough and only buy a RAV4? Or do you really need to do it yourself and create, this $2 million DeLorean? That's a choice that you're going to have to make as you go through the process, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I told you to begin with, that what's an authority document is they could be various different things, like authority documents could be laws, regulations, safe harbors, other things like that. So again, you're just trying to figure out what are those different authority documents that you have to comply with. And as you're sitting there listening to this, I'm sure that there's several different ones that you know already that you have to comply with, maybe some other ones you don't even know that you have to comply with. Now, one of the issues is mandates don't use the same terms across the different documents. So as an example, you could have words like shut the faucet, close the spigot, turn off the nozzle. Now, for most people, you know, as we're looking at that, we think, well, maybe those are the same, right? But maybe they're not the same things. And so even if you guess that it's asking you to do the same thing, you have to be able to actually prove that turn off the nozzle, close the spigot, and shut the faucet actually are the same things, okay? Now, how do you do that? Well, you end up coming up with a dictionary or acronyms to be able to understand, well, what does it mean to shut off the spigot versus turn off the faucet? Are those the same things or are they not? And so you actually have to go through and create definitions for these different terms. Now, again, as I told you to begin with, right, there's different ways that you can do this. You can do off the shelf, which means that you're relying on something that's already built, or you can do it yourself. Now, if you choose to do it yourself, you're going to have to do some things like build a noun translator, build a verb translator, and provide a common control. So now I want to go through and talk to you and explain to you how you could do this if you're going to do it yourself. So let me get back here. Sorry, I swapped around. Okay, so if you're going to build out a noun translator, again, I told you to begin with that there are different citations, right, in those documents. So some different terms that you might see that are coming along, like request from the controller, request access to personal data, request by a concerned party. You have to come up with and build a noun translator to say, in this example, hey, personal data request is the term that we're going to use whenever we see things like this. Okay, so that's how you would kind of build out a noun translator. If you're going to build out a verb translator, you have to do the same thing, right? Where you're coming up with some sort of harmonized term that makes that leap between what you happen to see in the particular documents and say, okay, do all of these citations, are these meaning the same thing? Whenever we see this kind of wording, we're just going to use the harmonized term, provide access. Okay, so that's what it means to kind of build out a verb translator. Now, you also have to provide a common control. And so you'll see again that these words that we had used before, provide access and personal data request, now you can see how those nouns and verbs start to come together into a common control that we have developed, right? So every time you see certain things in an authority document, you can look it up and say, okay, these are the nouns and verbs that are being used. And we translate that into what we're using internally to be able to create our control. And now we can create a particular common control that every time we see those combinations of nouns and verbs and the wording like that, what we're going to do is ensure that we provide access to personal records when a personal data request is received. And so you come up with this common control, okay? Now, at that point, again, as you see, as we're building along here, we're taking those citations and we are mapping them to a particular control. So in this, ABC document, when it tells me to do X, Y, Z, this is the common control that I'm going to apply at that particular level to be able to prove, again, that I am following that mandate from that particular authority document. Now, we also talked about crosswalking, right? So how does this look again? Well, you can choose to manually crosswalk. And again, here's just some examples. These are citations from 4 different documents that are all using different words. And so again, you can choose to manually do this and say, you know what, this kind of sounds like this one over here, so I think these are kind of the same. Or again, if you're using a common controls approach, if all of these particular citations have already been mapped to a common control, now that common control acts as a common key to know, again, when I'm doing this, when I'm doing this one control, I know that now I'm actually complying with these four. So instead of doing four different controls, I'm only doing one. And again, imagine how much time that saves you if you're only doing one control instead of four different controls, right? So going through this process, taking a little bit of time at the beginning really saves you a lot of time. So again, at this point, you can kind of say, well, okay, Jason, I did go through very quickly because, again, we don't have very much time today. But you have to really kind of ask yourself at this point, do you want to go through all of the work of doing it yourself and building this, $1 to $2 million DeLorean, or is something that's maybe an 80 or 90% fit going to be good enough for what you need to do? And in fact, if you're like most organizations, especially when it comes to compliance, good enough is usually good enough. Because again, if you go back to your CFO or your CEO, if they could comply with something only spending $30,000 instead of $1 million, which one do you think they're going to choose, right? And so, again, this is why so many people actually choose to use an off-the-rack method, right? Again, it's the same reason. If you need a car, you're probably not going to go out and build your own car because that takes a lot of time and a lot of money. You're going to go down to a local dealership. You're going to buy whatever car works best for you. Okay. So now let's dig in a little bit more and talk about how unified compliance has actually taken a lot of that work. It's built an off-the-shelf option for you so you don't have to go through and spend millions of dollars trying to create your own compliance framework. Now, there's just some of the stats here, about the fact that, and again, doesn't have every authority document in the world, but it has about 1,000 of the ones that most organizations have to follow, right? There's hundreds of thousands of individual mandates that have already been mapped back to between 10 and 15,000 common controls. All of the dictionary, that noun translator we talked about, the verb translator we talked about, the dictionary, all of the information to be able to crosswalk and do all of that stuff has already been built into a SaaS portal that you can actually subscribe to. And so, I'm going to go through and now show you really quick kind of how easy it can be, but you can even do it yourself. You can go out to commoncontrolshub.com and you can actually sign up for a free starter account, and you'll be able to go through and do some of the same things that I'm showing you right now, because I'm going to jump in and actually show you how easy and how simple it is to do this. Now, there is modularity. One of the things that we talked originally about at the top of our discussion is a lot of times companies don't have something that can grow with them or is extensible. This framework actually does that. Whether you're doing 2 documents or 100 documents, it works the same. And it's taken a lot of time because, again, to do this, and it really is the only framework like this to ever be patented, and really do it in the way that you're going to see it done today. So what's a common control again? Remember at the beginning, we talked about that there are different words that are being used by a lot of those authority documents. And so a common control is a shared compliance requirement that is written in plain English that is connected to those original mandates. Because again, if you remember, one of the challenges people have is being able to know that the particular control they're doing actually meets the mandate. And so what you can see here is around the outside here, we've got turn off the faucet, shut the tap, shut off the water valve, close the spigot, tighten the nozzle, and swing the tennis racket. Now, because of the process that we've gone through, effectively, we know that these 5 all can be linked back to shut the faucet. And so again, instead of turning off the faucet, shutting the tap, creating separate controls for each of those, if you shut off the faucet, you are complying with those 5. Now, we're not swinging the tennis racket by shutting the faucet. That, again, if that's a mandate, we'd have to have a separate control for that. But a common control, again, it's that shared compliance requirement that when you do this, you're able to prove that you are in fact complying with the particular mandate. Okay. And again, so there's a whole scientific process for how, jumping and looking at everything to be able to make this work that's already been built out before. That again, if you want an off-the-shelf model, it's here and ready to go. Here's an example of how, again, particular document, this is NIST 800-171, a couple of citations in there, how this is showing deduplication within a particular document, right? So you've got 2 different groups of words in 2 different citations, but again, as you analyze these, you can see that if we establish access rights based on least privilege, we're actually complying with both of those particular mandates. So again, you're going to see deduplication within documents, but you will also see deduplication across the documents. And I'm going to give you an example here of 3 different documents that a lot of you probably have to comply with, so we can start showing you what it actually looks like. So again, each of these things gets tagged, uploaded from the authority documents into the common control workspace, and I'm going to jump in and actually show you what that looks like here in just a minute. The framework is also loaded into the CCH as well, so everything ends up working together in a very easy to use tool. In fact, I'm going to show you here in just a minute how easy and how quick it can be for you to be able to come up with a total list of common controls that you would need to follow in order to comply with 3 particular documents. Okay. And it leverages the framework. Again, there's access to over about 1,000 different mapped documents and about, as I said before, 10 to 15,000 different common controls that most likely, one of those 10 or 15,000 common controls is going to help you comply with most of the different mandates from the authority documents that you're working with. So now I want to start putting some numbers here and jump in just really quick and show you how easy this can be to use. So again, 3 different authority documents that a lot of people have to follow is ISO 27001, NIST 853, and this is the latest version, the Rev 5 from October. And another one that often people will follow is COBIT 2019. So from this slide, you can see how many citations are in each of those documents and how many mandates are in those documents. And so again, if you remember, a mandate means ISO 27001 is asking you to do 367 different things, okay? So when you add everything up, there's 2,353 different mandates or controls you are being asked to follow. Now, what I want to show you and what's really important is these numbers. So when you go through at the end and using something like UCF where you can automatically deduplicate, right? Because again, many of these controls or many of those mandates have been mapped back to the same common control, you reduce significantly the amount of time that it takes you to comply. And so again, as you're looking at this, you can see that there's almost 50% duplication between those 3 documents, which means if you try to comply with each of those documents by themselves, you're probably going to have twice as many controls and spend twice as much effort to comply with those as if you were to combine them together and use something like UCF, okay? Now, again, the other thing is, if you notice off to the right, even the hours to map these documents. And so again, if you remember, that was just one of the many steps that you need to go through. But by using something like UCF, you can save yourself, in this instance, almost 800 hours of time. I'm sure that's 800 hours of time that you would rather be doing something else than reading documents and trying to figure out how to map them to a particular control. Okay, so how easy is it actually to use this? Well, let me jump out of presentation mode here, jump over into the tool, and I'll actually show you how easy it can be to be able to create a list of all of those controls that we just looked at by simply typing in here. So let me add my first one, NIST 853, moderate, October 2020, boom. And you can see the numbers are going to be increasing over here because I'm creating a list that will give me all of the controls that I need to comply with for these 3 documents. So I've already added NIST there. I'm going to add ISO 27001. And you see our numbers are going up. I'm going to add COBIT 19. Boom, and now I have a list of 1,200 different controls that I need to follow. And at this point, I can save it and I can export it out into a spreadsheet that looks like this. So here's my COBIT, ISO, and NIST 853, and shows you exactly all of the different controls that you have to do, where they actually intersect into the different documents, where there happens to be duplication across the documents as well. And again, so here's now I have a list of 1,200 different controls, which is half of what you would have done if you would have done it separately, that I can simply export again from the tool. And you saw how quick that was. It was about a minute or two to be able to create the list, create the build, export it out into an Excel file like this, that now you have that consolidated, deduplicated list. Okay, so that's really how simple it can actually be. So again, this is I showed you the exact spreadsheet. I just wanted to put a screenshot in here just in case technology didn't work this morning. But again, you can see that literally within a few minutes, you can actually bypass and save yourself hundreds, if not thousands of hours worth of work. Now, we're excited to have MetricStream with us because, again, one of the other options is, yes, you can export into an Excel file, but if you're using a GRC tool, instead of using the particular spreadsheet export, you can also pull it through into a GRC tool like MetricStream through an API. So again, all the time savings of having to copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, literally you put it in an API code, you refresh, you link everything together, and maybe in less than a half an hour, boom, all of your stuff can end up coming over. And that's why we're excited, because MetricStream is actually going to show you again how easy that can be. Now, couple things, kids, again, before I jump off with you, if you're looking at this and you're like, man, this is awesome, I got to do something with this because I really want to start saving hundreds or thousands of hours of time, here's a couple of things that you can do today, right? So again, get out a piece of paper really quick, write it down. But I told you before, you can get a free starter account. Just go out to commoncontrolshub.com, sign up for a free starter account. You can start playing with it yourself. The other thing too, again, is if you'd like to actually have a demo of how this would actually work for your organization and get your team up to speed on how you can do it, just send me an email, reach out to me, and we can go ahead and get something scheduled so that you can actually start to see, just like I did, before I showed you those 3 documents and how much time you can actually save. We can do the same thing, but specific for your organization when we go through and do a demo. All right, so with that, now let's switch over and actually see how easy it can be to use a common control approach within a GRC tool by having Ashwin take over.
Thanks, Jason.
Here you go, moving the controls to you.
Just waiting for it. All right. All right. Thanks, Jason. That was very insightful. So thank you, everyone, for joining in. I'm Ashwin Raghavan, the GRC Solutions Architect from MetricStream. All right. Just to complete the story where Jason left off with, right? If you just try to think about very common problems, what we really face from a content or regulation standpoint, once we have that, harmonized with a provider like UCF, where we try to bring in content from UCS to MetricStream. So what next, and what are we trying to solve here, right? So if you really broadly try to classify some of the very common problems that we have today, as Jason also tried to mention, it's complex compliance landscape, right? Given the number of regulations, frameworks, and standards companies really care about or have adapted, trying to bring them under a single umbrella, trying to go over the mandates and requirements that the regulation really has to call for is really a laborious and a tedious task the one or a company has to do, right? So how do we really solve this, right? And what are the different ways to do that is what I'll maybe talk about in the next few slides, and I'll also show you in action with the tool itself, right? Another common problem, I would say, is it's manual and time consuming. It's a laborious task to go over all of these different mandates, regulations, controls, requirements as such, try to bring them down and connect the dots and really monitor them as a company, right, to really tie it back to a policy and see what are the kind of different controls that we have to, rely on, or what are the different controls we do have which maps back to a policy as such, right? That's one of the very key problems, and we offered here from our customers out of this region as well. The other one is a siloed function. There are multiple different business lines working within an enterprise, right? Catering to multiple different needs and trying to bring them into one harmonized, into one integrated platform is what MetricStream really helps you do. Just trying to bring everyone, run appropriate reports to really see how compliant you are for a given regulation with further enrichment of the harmonized data that we receive from UCF, right? So how do we really solve this? So one is, once we bring in the content into MetricStream, it really gives you the purview to focus on the right areas, risk controls and requirements as such, right? It really helps you to gives you a mechanism to tie it back to a given policy or a standard, which also gets stored in one of our library objects, if you will, which you're going to get to see in the next few minutes from now. And again, the deduplication element of it, trying to extract appropriate reports, charts, and insightful dashboards for the C-suite, right, is very critical to really give you an understanding of where do we stand as a company for a given regulation, right? So that's very critical. And last but not the least, save time, right? We're trying to save hundreds of hours, as Jason rightly said, right? So by having this technology piece where we provide value with this GRC tool to take you to the next level of trying to get the whole process digitized and automated to give you the right insights to take appropriate actions. All right. So I wouldn't want to spend more time on the PPT. Let's see that in action with a live demo. So quickly switching back to the tool as such. So this is the MetricStream landing page. So just to set some context here and just to give you some insights, MetricStream is a cloud platform. We are a GRC solution.
Ashwin, could I interrupt for just a moment? Your audio is going in and out a little bit. Please make sure that you're facing your microphone. Thank you.
All right. I'm sorry about that. Can you hear me okay? Is that better now?
That's good. Yes.
All right. Yeah. So if you think about it, MetricStream is a cloud platform offering GRC solutions, compliance solutions, risk solutions, policy, internal audit solutions, regulatory change management, engagements, and so on. So going back to the topic of the content of the areas of compliance, or could be controls or requirements as such. So bring in content from UCF is a seamless experience. There are already APIs and interfaces developed between the UCF Common Control Portal to MetricStream. So the integration is so seamless that just by a click of a few buttons, you can bring in the content from UCF into MetricStream, enrich that just further, draw insightful reports, and take it into next steps for control tests, and so on and so forth, right? So let me quickly show you how we really do that today, and how do we really bring in content from UCF, right? So what I've also done is I have set up some authority documents for the sake of this demo. I picked up maybe ISO and PCI as one of the content that I would like to pull in. So MetricStream is also role driven, so you get to see things, and you can do things depending on the role that you as a person have been tagged to. So assuming that I'm an admin who's trying to pull in content, so the first thing that I do is just import the content from the UCF framework into the MetricStream cloud platform. So it's as easy as that. You just open the form, you hit the link which says get authority document list that you've already created on your UCF portal as such, and you get to see the whole list of documents that has already been created, right? So in this example, I have gone ahead and have created ISO 27013 and also PCI as such, right? And once you choose them that you would like to import, right, you just click on the submit icon. There's a process behind the scenes which runs and which pulls in all the content back into MetricStream in no time, right? So there we go. We just click on the submit. The whole content comes into MetricStream database as such. So what next? So once we have the content from UCF pulled into MetricStream, we do also have a set of objects, what we term as GRC libraries, where you store your set of risks, your set of controls, your evidences, your requirements, your question procedures, various different elements for a given authority document, right? So the next step after we pull in this content to the database is try to create them as library objects within the tool itself, right? So it just takes another few steps to get there. So we could easily do that with the authority document that's already been ported. So I go ahead, I choose what is the AD that I would want to create as a library object. In this example, let me say it's ISO 27013. And then I choose the document name. This is again the same document that I created on the UCF portal. And from here on, it lets you create the libraries as such. So you could choose how do you want to create the areas of compliance. In this case, the ISO 27013 is the area of compliance that we're trying to comply to. You do also have various options on how you want to tag this content. You can, create or tag it to additional attributes to different types, or it could be an environment, or it could be health and safety, human resource, so on and so forth. And who is really the owner of the content, right? In this case, I'm trying to pull in this content, assign it to a certain central team, could be the second line function who really owns and owns this content within the system. So let's maybe take an example of an organization here. Let's say it could be retail banking, right? And I want to have it assigned to a department called shared services. And let me assign it to a region here called as Americas. Again, this is just a sample structure that you see here. So you could pick and choose to what portion or which team within your organization really handles the content that you're trying to pull in, right? So once you have that, then you could also add more information to it. So who would be the owner of the content? Who could really run reports? Who could really maintain the relationships? Who really conducts the control test for the given set of mandates that you have pulled in from UCF, right? So you could also choose who the owner is. You could choose what is the kind of restriction that you want to apply for the content. Is that okay? If the set of controls, if the set of requirements is open to to all the different people who've been using the tool, or you want to really curtail it down to a certain set of folks is what you control by these different options. Similarly, you could also pull in the requirements, which nothing but means are citations, right? By filling in the different value drop-down values here, which could be the categories, the validity of the car requirement, and so on. And the ownership and restrict access to continues to be the same. You want to restrict the content to a certain department, or you want to have it open for the whole organization as such. And then the controls, right? So this is an interesting piece. So if you look at this, we also do have options to just create your harmonized controls, right? Where it says just the deduplicated controls that the organizations care about, or you also want to copy the whole list of controls for the given authority document list without harmonizing such content, right? We've also seen cases where customers would just want to bring in the content as is from UCF and then would want to slice and dice and take further actions, right? There have also been cases where, they say we just want to bring in harmonized content with the duplicate factor and just the mandatory controls and not the implied controls for a given regulation, and would want to, go over them and monitor them with the next set of steps, which is the control test, and so on and so forth, right? So it also helps you do that. And along the way, we do also get some additional information from UCF. So you also have an option to say, okay, how do you want to, whether you want to go with the classification that the UCF provides, or you want to, further enrich the content with your own classification, with your own priority, high, medium, low, so on and so forth, right? And then whom do you again assign it to? We do also pull in question procedures along with the control, the requirements. It also gives you the audit questions for the given authority document list. You could also choose what could be the response types for these questions, because all of this really come into play when I take you to the next step, which is the control test from here, to really answer to those responses for a given regulation or a framework which is being pulled in from the UCF. All right. So once you go fill this information up, it's just a one-off requirement. And again, it takes no time to pull in all the information from the integration that's already in-house under the hood to bring in all the content. And once they are, right, so you get a clear visualization in MetricStream to really go look at the content, right? So what you see here is a data explorer, right? Let me just open the areas of compliance that I have here in the system. So as I said, I do have many of them showing up, but I did import ISO 27000 and 2013 and the payment card industry. So once I have them imported, this clearly gives me a view to say, okay, ISO has about 175 requirements, which is nothing but citations. It is also linked to about 184 harmonized controls, which I just pulled in from the Common Control Framework Hub, right? And you could just, click on them to see what those controls are, right? You could just see, starting from all the 184 mandatory controls have just been pulled in. You could again further drill down to see what are the other relationships for a given control, right? Again, I can further drill down to say this control where it says, train all person and third parties as necessary is again further linked to another requirement, which is from the ISO. And it's also linked to one of the questions and procedures, what we call as audit questions, right? And again, further, as you enrich the content and when you try to create value for the content by, going over other different second-line functions, it also says this control, is going through a test and a self-assessment plan, which is already open, right? You could also see and view what is that information and so on and so forth, right? So this is a great value addition to really give you that kind of a sneak peek to give you the whole 360 picture with built-in robust relationship model here, right? So MetricStream comes with a robust relationship model, as I said, which is nothing but the libraries as what we term, wherein we store the list of controls, the areas of compliance, and the requirements and so on. All right. So as I said, these relationships could also be maintained within. You have a simple UI where you could just go open up and appropriately tag those relationships, enhance them further, uncheck them, so on and so forth. So this kind of a view really gives you an appropriate insight to where you are or where you stand as an organization that you're trying to comply to. So you clearly know when you're trying to when you look at compliance, or when you're trying to run a dashboard for where you stand as a company for ISO 27013, it clearly gives you a detailed, insightful view, right? Which I'm going to show you in the next few minutes. But depending on the relationships that you clearly have defined, right? So you clearly know this regulation or this standard or a framework as a best practice that I've imported from UCF is tagged to multiple different business lines within my organization, multiple different framework references, or could be controls, so on and so forth. All right. So what next after this, right? As I said, just to give you a sneak peek of what happens next from this would be a control test, and really the end result would be to see how really this content impacts the organization as such, and where do we stand from a compliance standpoint, right? That we care about as a company, right? So as I said, so once we have the content in, we bring in the content to the library, and then we choose what kind of controls have to be tested periodically, right? We go ahead, we test those controls based on operating and design effectiveness. We collect evidences for a given control, right? And based on that, you also derive what results to say, okay, how many controls have been passed, how many controls have been failed, and that aggregates as an overall report to say how compliant you are for a given regulation as such. So if you look at the screen here, this is a sample example where it clearly says that I've been trying to test an asset called laptops, which means it's been tied to about 4 to 6 controls here, and I would say, okay, one of the control which says change all default passwords, I could just go right on my design, how effectively is the design of this control, and how effective is the operational standpoint of this control, and there are appropriate results that gets derived, and that gets aggregated to the whole asset as such, right? So once we go through this process, ultimately we get to view those reports from a dashboard standpoint to say, okay, where do we stand as a compliance status for a given regulation? So let me quickly just open that. Yes, so if you look at this report, this is the end result is what I would say, right? So once you've gone and got the content into MetricStream and then you've enriched with different relationships, and then further to that, you've conducted some control tests, taken up some surveys and certifications, and ultimately, this is your end result to really say, where do you as a company stand for a given regulation, right? So if you look at this, it says for ISO, I do have 33 controls which have been passed, 33 controls which have been failed, and it also says 33 which are not applicable, which means I have not tested that in the last given quarter, right? And if you look at PCI, it again says there are about 29 controls which have been passed, and I can always, drill through that to really get into the details and the nitty-gritties of this to say, okay, what are the areas of compliance? Areas of compliance is the payment card industry that I'm trying to comply to, and there are 2 tests that I have conducted which have been passed, right? And this is the control name, which says assign authentication mechanisms for user account authentication, where a test has been conducted, which was a pass, and it was conducted for a certain given organization, which was retail banking as a business line with an organization for the region Americas. And again, you have a powerful mechanism as a hover card is what we call. You just hover at the content, it just gives you a small pop-out window which clearly calls out all the relationships for that given object, right? Again, how do we bring in these relationships? One of the input elements is again from UCF, where it says PCI, and this control is again linked to 4 asset classes, within my enterprise. It is also linked to 3 assets, and it has got 1 question procedures, and this is the question that has been pulled in, right? So this is how hover cards can really help you to view the information precisely that you're looking at. All right, given the time, this is all what I wanted to showcase today, and thank you for joining in. This was a pleasure. Let me open up the house for questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have a few questions. The first one would be, I think, for Jason. What is the difference between mandated and implied controls? Jason, are you on mute?
Well, of course, I'm talking to myself on mute. Now I'm off. I should be fine the rest of the time, right? No, that is a great question. Actually, it's the mandated controls are the ones that are specifically required by the authority document. The implied controls are ones that you may need to consider in order to accomplish the bigger one. And so again, what it means is, because UCF is based on a framework, there are child-parent relationships within the framework. So an example that you could give is, let's say a mandate says, get a tune-up on your car. Well, tune-up on your car might have 30 different steps, and so there might be 30 implied steps to accomplish the mandate, okay? But again, then you have to get into the, well, do the implied relate to us, right? If I own an electric vehicle that doesn't use oil, it's a non-combustible engine, then I don't need to get the oil changed, right? So one of those 30 I might mark is not applicable. So that's kind of the difference between the mandates and the implieds from the framework standpoint.
Great, thank you very much. This second question, I think, would be more for Ashwin. It's a little bit complicated. What are the key steps I should keep in mind when operationalizing a compliance or regulatory framework?
All right. So yes, I would say, I think it's very first critical to try back to your policy as such for a given organization, right? When you're trying to look at different regulations or frameworks or standards that the companies really have to care about, first trying to harmonize the content and trying to get a whole 360-degree relationship picture is very critical, right? We do have controls which are not sanitized at times. There are duplicate controls that every business lines in a given organization generally maintain, and they come back and they're trying to conduct multiple different tests for the same given control, but there is no appropriate aggregation to it, and the results that you draw with them would not be appropriate. So I would say the first key step, would be trying to harmonize this content and get the 360-degree picture, and then take it and do a crawl, walk, and run approach with those set of content that you really want to, cater or you worry about.
Great, thank you. Okay, back to Jason. What happens when regulations are changed or updated?
Yes. Not that ever happens, right? Especially those of you that have to follow 853, I'm sure that you're looking at that going, oh my gosh, we've been doing Rev 4, now what do we do? Don't worry, it's in there, right? But how you deal with that, again, is you have to kind of keep an eye on and know which authority documents relate to your organization, and know when you want to update them. But again, one of the reasons, one of the mistakes or problems that a lot of people have is they do everything so manual that it's difficult when any change happens. So one of the big changes like that is maybe a new authority document you have to follow, or an update, right? Like from 853 Rev 4 to the newest version. Well, if you're using, like I said, you can choose off the shelf or DIY. If you use an off the shelf tool like UCF, it's literally as easy as going into your list you already created, remove the old one, add the new one, rerun it. So it literally takes just a few minutes. Now, yes, there's still work to be able to now comply with those new things, but at least, getting your list and knowing what it is that you have to follow, you can actually do very, very quickly by using that. That's part of that, extensible and scalable thing that we were talking about before.
Okay, I'm going to stick with you, Jason, for the moment. Can we map regulations to our own documents?
map regulations to your own documents. Well, what we do is usually there is one option we have is the mapper tool that we use, because we have several clients that do this where they want to look at their internal requirements and take things like their policies and they want to map those back to the same list of common controls as if it were another authority document. So we do offer a couple of options for people to be able to do that. Either, again, kind of a do-it-yourself where you license our technology, we teach you how to use it, you can actually do it yourself, or you can hire the mapping team that does this full-time every day to actually do it for you as well. So there are a couple of options. That's how you can get kind of your internal things into this framework approach.
Great, thank you. Okay, back over to Ashwin. How can GRC tools be leveraged to check compliance maturity? We all have a lot of requirements that change all the time. We have to manage tools, infrastructure, and applications. How can GRC tools be leveraged to check compliance maturity?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So the GRC tools really, does the most of the job of monitoring these kind of regulations, trying to collect input from various different channels, data providers, trying to really point you to the appropriate decision or a change that you as a company have to really make to adapt, right? So there are different data elements to it to really monitor the ongoing changes within these different regulations. And there could be different RSS feeds or different content providers, right? And the tool really gives you the harmonized view, helping you make those appropriate decisions from wherein you can, raise an internal inquiry or take it through an issue, or try to update back your policy as such, or try to implement a new control if there's a regulation change, where it demands to have a new control as such. So yes, the process is automated, trying to cut down on all of the manual work that you as a company has to do without a GRC tool in place, which is most critical and vital given the unprecedented time that we are all going through, right? So I'm sure it is a value add and a must as a company that one has to look at.
Great. Okay, I'm going to stick with you, Ashwin. Someone is asking, how do I know which regulations I should be compliant with? COSO, COBIT, ITEL, ISO, PCI, FISMA, NIST. How do I know which regulations I should be compliant with?
Yeah, so this is again a very common questions which we hear from our customers out there who really trying to start their GRC journey as such, to say, what are the different kind of regulations that one has to comply to? So it again boils down to the kind of value that the enterprise is trying to bring in, or the problem that they're trying to solve. Is that something to do with healthcare, or something to do with retail, or pharma, or IT? Depending on which, it really helps you to choose what different standards or frameworks that one has to adopt, right, to have a robust policy in place, to have a federated GRC in place. So I would say, to start with, NIST would be a very common framework, and ISO complying to ISO 27001, which caters to most of those use cases, giving you a broader purview of very common standard controls that one has to really comply to. So this would be a good starting point, and as and when you mature on the journey, right, it really gives you an option or a better thinking to say what other regulations or standards, right, or frameworks, sorry, if you have to adapt to make it as a much more mature journey.
Well, thank you very much for the both of you. I think that's all the questions we have time for. Again, thank you for joining our webinar, and a replay link will be sent to everyone who registered for the webinar. Thank you so much.